Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Andrew Turner, host and founder of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today we have an amazing guest, Mr. Eric Edmeades. How are you, Eric?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So it's quite an unusual toggle this actually, because normally you have the beautiful surroundings behind you and you've now got a white screen, or you're in heaven or something like that. And I'm sat in the Caribbean somewhere apparently. So
the difference is that when the recording's finished, I'm going to walk out to the scenery that you have behind you, and you're going to walk out to the white room.
I'll walk out to the rain, actually, where I am here, actually. But anyway. So thanks for coming on the show today. I was just actually reminiscing and just realizing when I actually originally met you, it was actually over 3 years ago. I was sat in the audience with about 1,000 other people, and I'd gone to watch. Originally, it was actually I'd gone to watch a guy called Brian Tracy, who you probably remember, who you probably know very well. He was a bit of a legend in the kind of sales and personal development space. And there was another person called Eric Edmeades on the bill. I thought, I wonder what this guy's about. You came on stage and you actually blew the audience away with your speech, where you talked about your history and the things you've done in your life. So I suppose a quick question to help the audience understand what you do these days. Who is Eric Edmeades and what do you do today?
Yeah, I guess my background is I'm as an immigrant to Canada when I was young. I was born in South Africa. I grew up in Canada, went to school there, that sort of thing. And then I got involved in technology. I went to go work for a tech company, and then eventually started my own tech company and ran that for some years before I sold it. And then I just got into a pattern of sort of serial entrepreneurship where I was involved in different businesses, as you mentioned, the film studio in California and military research and development, medical simulation, a bunch of different interesting things. And then about 6 years ago, I decided to, sort of fast forward my plan. I'd always had this idea that I would spend my 60s in education, and because I think it's one of the most important places to be. It's just not a great place to make money. So I thought once I had money, then I'll go in the education space. And I got the strangest phone call one day, and it was a phone call from Tony Robbins' company, and they were asking me to come and teach business and entrepreneurship and marketing at his seminars. And I was like, okay, I'll give that a go. And I loved it. I mean, I just really loved it. I went from being not a speaker to being on stage in front of thousands of people, and I just took to it. I just really, really enjoyed it a lot. And so after touring with Tony for about a year and a half or so, I decided to start taking my thoughts and writing them and, started creating programs, that kind of stuff. And that's where I established some brands that I now have as education companies. So I've got obviously Business Freedom that teaches entrepreneurship, and Speaker Nation that teaches public speaking, communication, and that sort of stuff. And then, and of course, WildFit that does the nutritional anthropology, food psychology stuff. And that's, those three things are where I spend the majority of my professional time these days. I still take the odd consulting gig here or there, but really that's where I put my time, and it's where my passion is.
It's quite. So quick question, how many years ago was that when you got the call from Tony Robbins' office?
About 6 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe a little more now. Maybe a little more now. Let me think about this. I feel like it might've been 8 years ago, if I think about it, 2012.
Wow. And because that's a major, that's kind of a major event. It's kind of like you must be thinking now. You must be thinking, okay, that's quite a big thing to happen, because obviously Tony's a bit of a legend. Obviously, you're a legend as well. So it's kind of like it's that kind of past the legend pattern, isn't it?
Yeah, I would dispute the I'm a legend thing pretty deeply, and to whatever degree I've developed some of that, I had none of that then. And the truth is, when I first got the phone call, I actually thought it was a practical joke. You
thought it was one of your friends ringing up to kind of impersonate the office?
Yeah, well, I knew the guy, and the only reason that I didn't think it was a joke, it was a bad week for joking, because our mutual good friend, mine and Tony's mutual good friend, Chet Holmes, had just passed away. So it seemed like an unlikely day to call me with a practical joke. That's the only reason I didn't I thought this is a joke, but bad timing. And then it turned out it was precisely because Chet had passed away that they needed a speaker. And
okay.
So it was just a weird confluence of events that led to, and I hadn't been on stage for something like 3 years at that point. So it's not like I was like, I think Daniel Priestley, our mutual friend Daniel, he talks about if you're riding go-karts and then somebody offers you the opportunity to drive F1 cars, you should probably say no. You should work your way up work your way up, right? And I didn't work my way up. I went from, I'm not even riding a go-kart, and now I'm going to go, speak in the Formula One on Tony's stage. And so it really was an intimidating and very big step for me at that stage. And I am really glad that I had the bravery to say yes to it and take it on.
Well, that goes back to that kind of comment that, you said about, it's a bit like the mindset stuff about Richard Branson says, whatever the question is, say yes. It's all that kind of stuff, isn't it? I suppose it's, but on that mindset stuff, I suppose what you're highlighting is that even when I see you and I saw you 3 years ago, and now what you do today, it sounds like you've been through a journey as well, because obviously to take that type of inbound call and then to have the bravery, as you said, and the authenticity to say, you were unsure about it, but you stepped up and you went for it, and then you didn't look back. So there's a kind of lesson out the back of that.
I really like Branson's view of that. I've been a fan of his, sort of entrepreneurial spirit since I had my business in England. I started my company in Bristol in 1997, and pretty much around that time would read anything that Richard would put out. And, the whole concept of screw it, let's do it. Like there's something I really understand. And that is, if I do look at whatever regrets I have in my life, I don't tend to have regrets about the things I did do. I occasionally have regrets about the things I didn't do.
Yeah.
And, so that's kind of the approach I took when they called me that day. And it's the approach I've continued to take. I found myself on a tour of a movie studio in California, and I'm on a tour. A buddy of mine's helping them raise some capital. He asked me to come and take a look at the place just for fun, because it's where they made Star Wars and stuff. And the next thing you know, I make a comment that the way they're pitching to the investors is not really going to work. And my buddy Gavin says, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, look, they're doing this, they're doing that. It's not flowing. It's not a good presentation." And he goes, "Well, would you talk to the owners of the studio and help them with the pitch?" "No, I wouldn't do that. I'm on a tour. I don't know anything about raising money. I'm just telling you my impression."
He's trying to be a customer. Yeah.
Yeah. Like he's like, but your ideas are really good. You should share it with them. And I was terrified. But again, I said, okay, yes. And I sat down in a board meeting with the owners of the studio and said, I just have an opinion that the way you're pitching right now is not going to work for the investors. No kidding, Andrew. They then said, well, we have another group of investors coming in this afternoon. Would you please do the presentation for us? And I was like, okay. Are you serious? I'm on a tour over here. And again, I of course I should say no to that. That's ridiculous, except that there was a part of me that just said, what the hell? So I said yes. And the next thing you know, I found myself standing in the George Lucas Theater, 140-seater private cinema where THX sound debuted and Photoshop was invented across the street and Pixar was invented in this building over here and Empire Strikes Back and Pirates of the Caribbean. And I'm standing in this room speaking to these investors, and I do the whole pitch. And then one of the investors, the lead investor, he says, seems like an interesting opportunity. If we invest in the company, will you stay and run the company? I'm on a tour. And,
I didn't buy this ticket. I didn't buy this ticket. This is an advanced ticket, a VIP ticket.
Yeah, this is a VIP ticket that I did not buy. And, but one thing led to another, and I ended up acquiring the studio myself. And it was one of the biggest, bravest things I ever did. It ended up also being one of the most difficult, stressful, and complicated things I ever did. Caused me no end of pain and difficulty, but it also ended up being one of the greatest growth experiences I could experience as a human being and as a business owner.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the audience and I was listening to your talk, I mean, maybe it's because I suppose I've been at that age where I remember all the movies that you were managing the models for. It just was such a, I'll never forget it. It was such a great talk. And the way you engage, I remember the way you engaged the audience, and you walked through the audience and you were scaring some people in the audience and, kind of like waking them up kind of thing. And that's that thing about that, I suppose, the way you change your mood. You change your mood. You change the style of how you deliver things during the talk, which makes it very memorable. So I suppose a quick question. I mean, because I know you went through a bit of your backstory about how you accelerated through your kind of childhood and through to actually where you were as an adult and things like that. Is there some things that you can see in how you brought up and how you actually mapped through your education that got you to where you started or where you ended up? Any lessons from that?
Yeah, there's no question. I have a general principle that the easier your childhood, the tougher your adulthood. The easier your high school life, the tougher your university life. The easier university life, the tougher your professional life. So I as a kid did not have that easy. You know, we were immigrants to Canada, and what that meant was that we were culturally separate. We didn't understand things like, you know, ice hockey. And so when you're a kid and you can't fit in with that stuff, it forces you to develop a bunch of coping mechanisms because you don't totally fit in. And then, of course, I went through, you know, family breakup and alcoholism and all that kind of stuff, and having parents live on different sides of the country and having to fly back and forth between them. And, you know, it ended up being this really rewarding and challenging childhood that created a bunch of interdependence and sort of set me up with a understanding of what I might now call practical psychology. I had to figure out what was driving people around me, and I had to be able to predict behavior because there was a lot of insanity around me at that stage. Then I was also really gifted by some phenomenal teachers. I had a teacher in grade 3. His name was Jan Kolczynski. And what a phenomenal teacher he was. To this day, I can still remember some of the lessons he taught. I was 8 years old. Wow. He was a phenomenal storyteller, but he was a good man. And he really provided a different view of education that actually inspired me to want to become an educator. And so to a large degree, I would say that a big part of what I do today is inspired by his contribution to my life at 8 or 9 years old. And then was
that in Canada or was that in South Africa then?
That was actually in Canada in grade 3 in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Right.
The other Halifax.
Yes, exactly. Yes, not the one in Yorkshire, like where I'm from. Yeah. And so you said so that you said that Jan was a big influence on your kind of when you're at age 8, and then you
and then I went to a very, very, very challenging boarding school. I went to a boarding school where our winter program involved 26-mile snowshoe races and 900-mile canoe trips, and really like serious.
Wow. Sounds like U.S. Navy SEALs.
Well, I'll tell you what, the school at one point, there were 2 schools operating. And as I heard the story, the schools used to compete in what they called the huge annual inter-school race that I think only took place. It wasn't annual. I think it was twice every 2 years or something, but it was a 55-mile snowshoe race. And when one of the schools ended up closing down, our school challenged the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the military to race with us. And when they found out that they're like, a snowshoe race with a bunch of kids, that'd be great. And then it's 55 miles. And like, we train for 6-mile search and rescue operations. We don't even understand how to do 55 miles. And so it was a tough school. There's no question about that. And again, I was gifted with some really, really, truly excellent teachers. Mr. Jackson was our headmaster, phenomenal teacher. Dave Scott in grade 8 was just incredible. There's a list of them, just truly excellent human beings that influenced my life in a positive way. So I think I was very lucky to have significant adversity as a child, but also to have really high quality people around me. And I think the combination of those 2 things, I'm very grateful for.
So, I mean, what you alluded to is that, you know, as I call in some of the guests I've had before, is it's kind of this people have these peaks and they have these valleys. So it sounds like you've been through some peaks and valleys in your personal journey before you got into even your business journey. And obviously, I presume you've had some, as you start to as well. Could you share some of the stuff that you found and you learned on this? Because everybody, what I find, some people would talk about just purely peaks, and I go, that's not real, that's not authentic. You know, so I suppose it's what have you learned on the valleys as well? Anything you can share?
You know, here's a good example. When I was 17-ish years old. Let's go back a little bit further. When I was 15 years old, I made a decision that I no longer wanted to go to the boarding school that I was at.
Right.
And my father had only recently, found sobriety. And what I can tell you as the child of an alcoholic is that an alcoholic, you know, they have their AA birthday. So when they become, and by the way, I'm not breaking, I mean, he breaks his anonymity all the time. I know I'm not supposed to say it, but he tells everybody. So I think I'm okay. But what's interesting about that is that in AA, they have your AA birthday, like every year after your sobriety. And okay. I also feel in my experience of alcoholics that birthday often has a reflection upon their level of maturity at that stage to some degree. In other words, when my dad was 3 years sober, he was like a 3-year-old adult. And so he wasn't really ready to be a father in any kind of a way. And this is not a judgment of him, it's how it worked out. He's a great man and a great father. It's just at that stage, not the ideal circumstance for being a father. And so he was insistent that I went back to the boarding school. I was insistent that I wouldn't go back to the boarding school. Okay. And he kicked me out of the house. And I'm not sure how serious he really was about it, but I left anyway. And so at 15 years old, I was homeless and living on the streets of Edmonton, Alberta. And, you know, in the UK, I don't think you can even relate to the closest thing you can probably relate to what Edmonton, Alberta would be like is Siberia. We're talking, it's minus.
No, it's pretty extreme, isn't it? Yeah. It's
rough. And so I was, you know, homeless and I couldn't get myself enrolled back in school without a parent's signature. And it was a really very, very difficult time in my life. And frankly, something I would never wish upon one of my children or frankly, anybody else's children. And however, I'm really grateful that I went through it because the life lessons that I learned, having to be fully responsible for myself, having to figure out how to eat, having to figure out how to not freeze to death at night, really taught me stuff that I know has given me resilience. So now
it's like real survival skills, isn't it?
Yeah. So today, you know, things will happen like COVID, for example, and I tend to handle it a little better than most people because I have faced some of those things. I'm not saying there aren't people who handle it better than me too. I'm just saying I tend to handle the big stuff relatively well because I had big stuff happen. I mentioned earlier when I was about 17 or so, I was working at a gas station and I was filling up a car and the gas spilled out of the car and I went inside and the manager of the gas station flicked a lighter at me and lit me on fire. It was a practical joke. He didn't really, you know, I don't know what he was thinking, but next thing you know, they're telling me I'm going to lose my right arm, that I may never write again. I'm in the hospital for 6 weeks. They're taking skin off one part of my body to rebuild the next part of my body. I mean, it was something.
That's pretty extreme, isn't it? Wow.
You would never wish that upon your own child or anybody else.
No.
But equally, I'm really glad that I went through that because, again, it taught me a great deal about pain management. It taught me a lot about forgiveness. It was the thing that I needed at that stage of my life. Would I want to do it again? No. But so I think that, yes.
How old were you when that happened then? When the 17? Wow. Grief.
Yeah.
Grief. Amazing.
Interesting time.
Every time I hear you or speak to you, I learn something new about you. Your stories, you've got a library of stories, unbelievable. I've got to start sharing my stories. Maybe I was going to go on a guest on somebody else's podcast. That's great. No, so I suppose thank you for sharing that kind of personal story about some of the examples there on the G side. I mean, on the T side, I suppose you mentioned in your intro that you know there's this thing called technology. That now kind of seems to surround us, and you know some people seem to engulf people too much as well, where they never seem to put it down. I think that includes both my sons Ben and James, who seem to go eat, sleep, Xbox, repeat, which seems to happen on a regular basis, which obviously is not completely the right thing to do. But on the tech side, what got you involved in the tech scene? What got you involved in that kind of area, and how does it impact you today?
You know, I was, computers were just coming out as I was going through school. So my generation, the kids that graduated from high school in 1988 barely touched computers in school. I remember that in our boarding school, we had a computer lab that one of the parents had helped sponsor. And so there was limited access to computers. And there were like elective computer courses when I was in grade 12, but it wasn't anything that was part of our life. What I was very lucky about, though, was that when I was homeless at 15, one of the ways I got myself off the street was that I noticed that the guy who owned the local video arcade that we used to hang out at, I noticed he was always tired. So I went up to him one day and I suggested to him that I knew why he was tired. I wish, thinking about it now, I wonder what it was like for him to have this impetuous 15-year-old who probably looked about 12, walk up to him and go, "You're tired." And he goes, "Yeah, I am tired." And I go, "You're tired because you're here at 9 o'clock every morning opening this place up, and you're here till 3 o'clock in the morning closing it." I said, "You let me open it at 9. I'll run it till 12. And then I'll take over at 12 again and run it till 3 and lock it up for you." And he goes, "I'm not hiring." And I go, "I'm not looking for a job. I just want to sleep here at night."
Yeah.
And because he had no problem violating child labor laws, he accepted the deal. And so what that meant was for the next several months, I was living in a video arcade at night. And so weirdly, of course, I just played games all the time. I just played hours and hours and hours a day. And what that did,
is this where you get the tokens? You get the tokens out of the safe, and you just keep putting the free tokens in.
No, you just open the machine and hit the button. It's like, and you know, you just go ding, 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 and you have unlimited credits, and you just play all night long. And what it taught me, though, is it taught me how computers think. It made me feel safe about computers. I understood the way they worked. And so when I was just out of high school and I got my first job, I'm about 19, 20 years old. And I was doing recruiting for a company, and they got a computer, and nobody knew what a computer was. They just bought one because it was like, you're supposed to, and nobody would use the thing. And so at night I would have to
collecting dust.
Yeah. And at night I would have to sit there and take sales calls from the salespeople. And so I would just get on the computer and start playing with it. And first thing was, I wasn't afraid. And so one of the things that holds people back from technology is they're afraid of it. Well, I wasn't. I wasn't afraid of breaking it because I knew they don't, you know, there's nothing I could do. So I played and I learned how to program it, and I created games, and I got quite good at it. And I think what that did is allow me to be a little bit ahead of the technology curve versus other people exactly my age. If you were 5 years younger than me, you got all that knowledge in school. But if you were 5 years older than me, you certainly didn't. And so that created a circumstance where I got this call from my dad one day saying, a buddy of his has a company, and it's high technology, and you know, he's been trying to hire people and nobody works out. And I've told him, you're the best salesperson ever. You should go work for him. And because I was, you know, a relatively effective sales guy, and I had this tech background, it was like the perfect opportunity.
Yeah, perfect combination.
And a business owner, and it worked out really well for both of us.
And what were you selling then? What were you actually offering? You remember?
The first products that we were really working with, he had kind of started this business in his bedroom, and by the time he hired me, I think he'd got his first packaged office, and he and I shared an office for the first little while. And over the next 7 years, I think we grew it to 150 employees in 4 countries. So it was a pretty exciting project. And the product initially was handheld computers, largely used for things like inventory management and so on. Then it kind of expanded out to include optical character reading, barcode scanning.
OCR, yeah, okay.
Barcode printing equipment. Then it morphed into wireless network installation and tablet computers, and it was just that whole data collection space. And I worked in that company for 7 years, and unfortunately, a lot of times what happens with business owners when they start a company, it's really easy to give equity away, but when the equity is worth something, it's not so easy to actually deliver. And so the owner of the company had made a number of equity promises to me and then just went back on his word, which was consistent with his behavior as a human anyway. And so the second time he did it, I just resigned. I couldn't take it anymore. I just quit. It was the scariest thing I ever did because I was earning a lot of money and I didn't know where else I would ever earn that kind of money. But my soul became worth more than the lack of ethics I was dealing with. And so I quit the job, and you know, one thing led to another. It was really kind of funny. I quit the job, and speaking of being here in the Caribbean, I was offered a job in the Caribbean, but I needed money to go to the Caribbean. And the funny thing is, my boss owed me about $180,000, and he refused to pay it to me. And you know, like, what am I going to do? Spend the next 2 years suing him? But here's the irony. If you want to know, like, very often, I know that in England, you guys have a better sense of irony than Americans, but Americans very often mess up. And so the way I explain irony so that Americans really understand it is that Ronald Reagan was not actually shot. He was not actually shot. He was hit by a bullet that bounced off his bulletproof limousine. That's irony, right? That's like real irony.
That's just like unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's, you know, and so the irony here was my boss didn't want to pay me the money because he was afraid I was going to start a competitive company. But I wanted to take the money and move to the Caribbean and become a stockbroker. But if I had no money, I had no choice but to start doing deals that I knew how to deal. And guess what? Ended up starting a competitive company. It was so funny. And so I started that company in Rington. I don't know how well you know the West Country there, but I started it in Rington, which is like halfway between Weston-super-Mare and Bristol, and ran that business for the next 9 years.
Wow. So that was kind of like you set up like a direct competitor to the company you just actually been working for.
Yeah, I mean, we did a few things that were different, but we really focused on repair services as well, which was something they only did later. But yeah, ultimately we ended up with a very competitive business. And believe me, I got my 150,000, 180,000. I got back over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So if you fast forward to what you do today, I mean, that's a hell of a traverse from what you did there in Bristol or Rington to Hollywood, doing stuff in studios, then to doing what you do today. I mean, what do you attribute that to? I mean, what were the big events that happened after that? You know, how did your business grow? Because you obviously made some. I think you said you made some kind of exit. You did some kind of, you know, you made some kind of, you got some kind of capital return on it, and then you used that to fund something else you did, and you went on your entrepreneurial journey from there, I presume.
Well, the first thing that happened was after about 5 years in business, I didn't need to be there anymore. The company ran quite smoothly, maybe 6 years. I didn't need to be there to run the business on a day-to-day basis. And that created some problems for me. Like, frankly, I lost interest in the company, and I lost interest in the industry. And so two big things would change my life. I spoke with a mentor of mine, and the mentor said to me, what do you love about your company? You're giving me all these things you don't like about it anymore, but what do you love about it? I go, nothing. I don't like anything about it. He goes, okay, but when was the last time the company gave you goosebumps or made you feel good? And I told some stories. Like, there was one of my employees who had been long-term unemployed for 7 years, on the dole for 7 years, came to worked with us at that point for 5-6 years. And then managed to get a mortgage. And I signed the letter of reference to help get the mortgage, and he bought his first house for his family. And I said, right. I really loved that I had such an influence on that. And then another one of my employees was just drowning under a mountain of debt. And so one day I sat down with her and I looked at the debt and I helped her reorganize it. Then I called all the creditors myself and renegotiated her debt for 10 pence on the pound, no kidding. And then paid off her debt for her and gave her a loan to fix up the rest. And I had another set of clients had a major custody problem, and I got involved and helped them protect the rights of their child. And I said, those are the moments that fill me with the greatest joy. And so my mentor said to me, so you're not really in the barcode data capture business. You're in the improving the quality of people's lives business.
Yes.
That's what your company does. Your company creates good jobs for people. So why don't you let your techie people do what they're supposed to do? Why don't you let your marketing people do what they're supposed to do? And you focus on creating the best ever working conditions you can for your people. And so this did two things for me. One is it allowed me to get refocused back on the business. Because honestly, Andrew, if I hadn't, I would have lost it. I would have self-sabotaged it into the toilet because I didn't like it anymore. And so then that year I made such shifts in the business that I no longer had to go to work at all if I didn't want to, but I did want to because I was helping people. And that, then as I got, again, I had spare time. And so I'd heard about, I think through BNI, I want to say, but I heard about the Prince's Trust. And so I contacted the Prince's Trust. And for people who are listening who don't know, the Prince's Trust is an entrepreneur, that one of their functions is to do these really cool, in a sense, micro loans for young entrepreneurs, where they give them loans of 5,000 or 10,000 pounds. Maybe it's different these days, and then they assign them to an experienced entrepreneur in their area who give them mentorship. And since this mentor had such a big impact on me, I decided to register with the Prince's Trust, and I did some mentoring work with them, and it was fulfilling. And that's really where I began this journey. That's where I started saying, wow, I really like helping people. I really enjoy facilitating growth for people and helping them improve the quality of their life, because I really am appreciative of the people who have done it for me.
Yeah, it's a bit, so that's interesting, because you're starting to explain your segue, your transition, isn't it? About you actually identified that you developed your superpowers. And your superpowers weren't running a detailed operation tech company, but it was actually that it's focused on the people and looking after the people and being an authentic leader and identifying how to coach and mentor and make them get into a better place. Sounds like that was the kind of pattern that seemed to form. We seem to have continued. I mean, my experience with you recently is you blow in an hour of some of the sessions I've been on with 800 people. The amount of value that you give to people is amazing. I mean, people are they pass out at the end of it because there's so much value. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But what I'm saying is that what you just explained resonates with me, because I've been on the receiving end of it. So it's really good to see. You kind of spark under your spark. Sorry. No, just saying it's kind of it's your spark. It's like you've ignited yourself. You found out what your sweet spot is, your bullseye, and you're kind of igniting that and doing more of that.
You know, Andrew, a big part of it for me is I really had some difficulties when I was young, and I know that there were people who stepped up and helped me. And so,
Mm,
and I know how good it felt to be lifted out of my despair, or lifted out of my pain, or lifted out of my frustration. And I
mm,
know that I really appreciated it, not from the people who simply lifted me out, but from the people who empowered me out. And that was a really big difference for me. And
yeah.
so that's where I get a lot of my enjoyment today, is empowering people to take
Mm,
charge of their relationship with food, or empowering people to become effective communicators. Because today, what could be more valuable? And of course, empowering people to build robust businesses that improve and enhance their quality of life, instead of making them work harder than they ever did before.
mm. And I suppose, and as this time that we're living now, if you think about those three, what I would call foundational pillars that you're building with, with WildFit and business freedom, and it's the Inception marketing stuff, isn't it? I think is that the three pieces.
Well,
You,
Inception marketing is really a subset of business freedom, but the Speaker Nation brand is, I think, what you're looking
yeah,
for.
Speaker Nation, yes, right, yeah. So because I think my observation in the last few years is that those are kind of, you're effectively helping people to develop their superpowers and for them to come out of their shell. So my observation with a lot of people on the kind of piece around, health and food, there's a lot of lack of education around that. And the stuff you're doing around WildFit is actually, opening up and dig into it. I mean, some of the stuff that you've been through recently with, the stuff from the doctors and the medical fraternity of what they say, and then what it means, and then what you found out, I think was it's absolutely staggering. And then you compare to getting people to be confident, stand on a stage, and actually be confident to actually develop a public speaking capability. I think that's a superpower that everybody should have.
It is, and where it's different than a lot of other skills is that when somebody is, if you want to become a phenomenal tennis player, you're going to have to work out hours and hours a day for 5 to 10 years, and it's because you're going to be learning a bunch of new stuff. The funny thing with speaking is that it's already inherently inside everybody. So it's very much like carving the statue of David out of the stone. So when I work with people on helping them become a comfortable and confident presenter, what I'm really doing is unleashing what already exists. And that's why I'm able to create such phenomenal transformation in people. Yes, there are some skills they need to learn, and that's stuff they can get with practice. But the deployment of a truly powerful, passionate, authentic delivery is something that exists inside everyone. And it's just that they've been conditioned by their school, by their parents, by their society, by their friends, and so forth to not do that. And so it's one of my favorite things to give that gift to people.
And I mean, in the thing about the what's been going on this year, I mean, one of your very funny. There's three funny things I love about you this year. Actually, was the COVID-15 rather than COVID-19, which, if anybody doesn't know what it means, Doshan explains to the audience what that means. I think that's definitely an Ericism, as I would call it.
I can't remember if I came up with it or heard it or whatever, but all I know is this, that I remember somebody, I'm not making fun of any politics here, but there may have been some politicians in America that referred to COVID-19 as being like the 19th iteration of the virus. And so I thought, well, COVID-15 is not the earlier version. It's the 15 pounds that people are putting on during the lockdown. And I've heard them since referred to as pandemic pounds.
All right. There's been some hashtags coming out about that, I suppose.
I'm sure.
And then the other one was, what I love about you, it was the food devil. It's like,
that's a very specific,
on the shoulders. It's like the food devil. What's the food devil telling you?
Yeah, those are very specific WildFit characters, trademarked WildFit characters. They're the food angel and the food devil. And where people come to know those is, it's when you go to an event or you're kind of given the opportunity to eat some food, and there's a part of you going, oh, look how yummy that is, and another party going, yeah, but you don't really want to eat that. And when we give it voice as the devil and the angel, it really allows people an increased level of consciousness about how it's almost like they have like a low-grade multiple personality disorder when it comes to things like food or procrastination or taking action or parenting or anything.
Exactly. It's fantastic. So in terms of given you've got these three business or three pillars, what's given we're in 2020, what's your what are your BHAGs? What are your dreams for the businesses you now? Because you've obviously you've got some amazing characteristics of what you do. I know you're an incredibly busy guy. What does the Eric in 2030 look like? What any views on that?
Well, WildFit, the drive and purpose around WildFit is to create really, really significant social change with respect to food. So we want to massively improve the quality of life of 1 billion people on Earth by changing their relationship with food, and thereby changing food regulation, food manufacturing, food registration, food regulation, lobbying, and all those types of things. So WildFit is really out to change the dialogue about food, to change the conversation. And I want to add to that, Andrew, and I'm sure you've heard me say this if you've been to a number of my programs, because it's not a secret, but I am absolutely clear that with the absence of diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and autoimmune disease, COVID-19 would have been nothing more than a bad flu that went around the planet and people didn't even notice it. We now know that in order to die or face serious hospitalization from COVID-19, you have to have really at least one major other disease, if not 2 or 3. In fact, half of the people have three other major diseases. And so I really believe that the most responsible thing that any country could do right now would be to radically overhaul the food manufacturing and regulation industries that they're dealing with, because the single best way to create herd immunity against something like COVID-19 is to end obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and autoimmune disease. And that can be done by changing the way the food industry is operated and the way people buy and shop and eat. So that's a major project that we're undertaking with WildFit, and we've done it really well. The business is 5-6 years old. We've served hundreds of thousands of people. We've had over 25,000 people do our full 90-day program in 130 countries. Like we're having an impact, and the impact is accelerating. So I'm excited about that.
You say it's 1 billion people. That's your target. It's 1 billion. Right. Wow.
Yeah, 1 billion people, and really, the truth is, I want to impact every billion people. I want them all. I just feel like if we get 1 billion people to change their relationship with food, we will change food so that the other billions of people will end up also changing the relationship with food. So the planet, the full overall, it's not like we're going to stop when we get to 1 billion. It's just, that's where we start. That's where
it's kind of like a critical mass. It's like a snowball effect, isn't it? You're going to get some real momentum behind it then.
That's right. I will tell you, Andrew, that about 2 weeks ago, I was contacted by somebody connected with Parliament in the UK, asking me if I would consider speaking with Prime Minister Johnson about that. Because as you've probably press, he's come out against obesity, and he's even changed. If I read correctly, he used to be very libertarian when it came to food, like people should just make their own decisions. And I think he's beginning to realize that the food industry has robbed us of the ability to make our own decisions, and it's now time for government to actually be involved. And so I've actually drafted a letter that I'm hoping is going to be with him shortly. I'm also working with a federal senator in the Canadian government. So as much as we're doing this at the grassroots consumer level, we're also going to go after it from a regulatory level.
Well, it's getting recognized, isn't it? That's the thing. It's getting recognized because you're getting all those good feedback, and people actually, there's a groundswell of opinion and a groundswell of change happening. So it's social impact, isn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting. So in the context of the other parts of your business, then, I mean, I suppose the business freedom stuff. I know you've been doing some stuff on that recently with some amazing guests on. Oh, by the way, that stage you had at the Business Freedom Summit recently.
Yes.
I don't know how the hell you pulled it off, but it was amazing. I mean, it's like you were like a giant Eric on the wall, like through a mirror. And then you had another guest as well. I don't know how where was that stage, by the way? Is it somewhere in the world, or
that was staged in Tallinn, Estonia, and with my producing partner there, Edu Academia, and they had done a book launch that way a few months earlier, and they decided to do the Business Survival Summit that way. So Roland, who was hosting the event, was physically on the stage, and all the technology was used to bring me and the guests onto the stage, almost like holograms, but as you said, in these large mirror setups. So it was pretty good. Business freedom is really, it's this observation. When I started my first company, it took me 6 years to get to the place where my company was truly an asset that didn't really need me to be there anymore. And when I started my next company, similar industry, similar level of startup, cash and so forth, it only took me 18 months to get there. And so clearly I had learned some things between those two entrepreneurial experiences. And so business freedom is really about teaching those things to people, teaching them how to build a business that improves their quality of life. Because frankly, for most people, starting a business just means working harder than they ever did before, spending less time with their family, not getting to travel, et cetera, et cetera. And my view is that entrepreneurship practiced correctly is the ultimate form of personal freedom. It is. And I would say that entrepreneurship today is the old version. It's what we used to think of as royalty. You know, it's what we used to think of as royalty. And now anybody can become royalty if they do the right things in entrepreneurship. And it's, in fact,
the hurdles, the barriers are lower. Yeah. The barriers to entry, you could say, it's more accessible, isn't it? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's every man's form of royalty. You can become a de facto lord in your industry and be at a place where your company doesn't need you to be there, where you're traveling around the world, spending time with your family, and you're making money while you sleep. And that is how entrepreneurship is supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work. But it's not how it's taught when you go get an MBA, because, and there's nothing wrong with an MBA. It's fine education. It's just that the clue is in the name. It's a Master of Business Administration. Well, no, I want an MBO, a Master of Business Ownership. It's a different thing.
Yeah. Well, it's quite interesting when I did my MBA, I have to admit that what people did, quite a few people actually went back. They came out of an industry, they did their MBA full time, and they went straight back to the industry they come from. So they, you know, obviously some people have then obviously developed into entrepreneurial careers, but it's interesting how it's that, I suppose it's back to the bravery thing, isn't it? About actually what's your comfort zone? Yeah. What do you want to do? Yeah. So in terms of back on the tech stuff, I suppose the kind of piece around, I mean, I've spent obviously quite a few decades in the tech industry. I've worked in Silicon Valley, et cetera. Worked for some big corporates like Tesco, linked to that whole food chain that you just mentioned. No comment. So I suppose that the concept of technology and how it's going to how it impacts our lives today and how it impacts the future. I suppose that with my observation with the kind of the Facebook and Google and one of my previous guests was a guy called Joe Toscano, who I don't know if you read his book. He's wrote a book called Automating Humanity, and he used to work for Google, and he left because he was uncomfortable with some of the practices of how they were using data on people, etc., and the harvesting piece. So I don't know what your view on that whole tech titan piece, or the ag for boys, I call it, or Scott Galloway calls a four, but it'd be interesting to see your perspective on that.
I think we need to be incredibly careful, and here's one rule: really evaluate in any given time whether you are using tech or whether tech is using you. That is the biggest question anybody should be asking in the day. So anybody sitting here on their phone, looking at Facebook or Instagram and just looking for the bottom of the wall, they are being used by tech, right? Yeah. Whereas somebody who picks up the phone and gets their Facebook account out, looks up their friend, contacts their friend, whatever, they are using tech. And so I think that the distinction that we want to look at is, when are we using it and when is it using us? And you have to remember, when you use it, you are basically a slave to Mark Zuckerberg or any of the rest of them, because they're making money based on your use. That's why they've built the platforms to be as addictive as they have been. They've intended them to be addictive, because the more addictive they are, the more time you spend looking at them, the more advertising they can sell. Now, Andrew, I had a fascinating experience just before my daughter was born. In fact, just before my wife got pregnant. And that was that we had all of our personal belongings stolen, including our phones and passports and a bunch of other stuff. And when the phones went missing, I made a decision at that point not to replace my phone. I just didn't. I just decided.
Well, you just went off the grid.
I still had my laptop. I could still do email. I could still, if I wanted to look at Facebook, I could do it from there. But I just decided to not be tethered directly to the internet constantly with a phone. And so for the next 6.5 months, I lived without a phone. And it was amazing. I would walk around all over the place. I'd go through airports, and all I see is people. This is all I would see.
Yeah, exactly. They're bumping into you.
And then my wife got pregnant, and it became appropriate again for me to get a phone. And guess what? I couldn't find a dumb phone. Like you just couldn't even buy just a phone anymore.
Oh, you mean like a talk and text one? Yeah.
Yeah, like I just couldn't find that anymore. And so I bought myself a smartphone and found myself back on the conveyor, but with a degree of consciousness about it that I might not have had I not had my 6.5-month hiatus. And I'll tell you one of the things, Andrew, that happened during that time. I wrote a 60,000 word fiction book that had been bouncing around in my head for a few years. And I had all this extra thinking time. So when I was on the plane, instead of like playing games or checking social media or whatever, it's like, I think I'll whip out the old laptop and write a book. And so it really taught me that there is a important distinction to be had. And that distinction is right there at the border of, are you using it or is it using you? And any time it's using you, put it down. If it's using you, put it down.
But it's also, that's very interesting, because also what you're highlighting as well with your 6 months or 6.5 months, is you actually basically went through some tech detox.
Yeah.
You kind of basically went like on the beach and you left everything behind and you just said, I'm disconnecting from this.
But Andrew, not fully. I still was running my business. I still went to my desk where I had a computer. I wasn't fully unplugged, but I was untethered.
Right. Yeah.
There's the distinction, is that I could walk away from it. And of course, what happens once you have a phone is you can't even walk away from it anymore. I will tell you that even on my phone now, the only thing that gives notifications is WhatsApp, because I don't do email. So I very rarely use email for anything except like specific document attachments and that kind of stuff. But so WhatsApp is the one way. And my phone is completely programmed that it will not start telling me anything until 10 o'clock in the morning. And it stops telling me stuff at 7 o'clock at night. And that's it. And those are the only notifications I get. I don't get Facebook notifications. I don't get Instagram notifications. I use it rather than it using me.
Well, that notification thing is a dopamine hit, isn't it? It's kind of like, it's like, what's the likes? It's kind of like, it just drives you crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Very true.
But what you're highlighting back to there is about discipline. It's about actually having the discipline to kind of compartmentalize things and use things as a utility that makes you have your ideal life and not be driven by external factors which actually drive you down the route you shouldn't be going down.
True.
So I suppose to cap off today's session, I mean, one of the things, obviously, you've been through an amazing journey, and thanks for sharing all your stories. It's amazing. Again, another great Eric stories tonight. But the piece around entrepreneurial journey, I mean, given you what you've been through, if there's obviously the audience for this type of podcast that I'm running here is that we're getting founders of companies, co-founders, leadership teams. They're listening to this. They're trying to work out from the guests I'm having on the show about what are the kind of takeaways, what are the kind of things, what's the as Daniel Priestley says, the mountain of value. You're still in the mountain of value, and you're thinking about what are the great things you've learned. So if you were going to summarize some kind of takeaways to share with the audience as a, kind of from your desk, I suppose, or from your heritage, what would you share around that?
Yeah, we could do a couple of hours on that, but I would say one of the issues is not to live with anxiety and pervasive fear about things. It's just not worth it. Like, one of the things I've really begun to realize is when you're 20, when you're in your 20s, one of the things you're most afraid of is turning 30, isn't it? And then when you're 30 and you get into your 30s, one of the things you're most afraid of is turning 40. And then when you're in your 40s, you got to be terrified of turning 50. 50! I mean, that's ancient. Andrew, it's ancient.
I'm not saying anything, Eric.
then you get into the 50s, and then the next thing you're supposed to be terrified of is your 60s. And here's the point. I can tell you right now that I enjoyed my 40s significantly more than I did my 30s. And I liked my 30s. In fact, I love my 30s a lot more than I enjoyed my 20s, but I really love my 20s. And you know what? I enjoyed my 20s a lot more than I did my teens, but I had a really good time in my teens. So what I'm trying to get at here is we live with this fear that thing is going to be really scary. What if I am now of the opinion that as long as I take care of my mind and body, I'm going to love my 60s. I'm going to love them. Like, I already know that. So I'm no longer living in the anticipation and the fear of it. Well, what I would say is that in entrepreneurship, we tend to do that. We tend to live with this, like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to make payroll this month, or I might have to fire this person. We live with this fear. Right. Here's a silly example. I went with a friend of mine to Universal Studios, and they had the Walking Dead display, right? The Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah.
And
Zombies.
I've seen The Walking Dead, so I kind of know roughly what it's about. And we go in there, and it's not just this props. They have actors dressed as zombies that jump out at you and grab your arm and scare the hell out of you. And so I'm walking through with this friend of mine and her teenage daughter. We're walking along, and one of the zombies jumps out. What do the two girls do? Like freaking out all over the place, right? And I don't even flinch. I saw the guy run by, but in the meantime, because I haven't flinched, I'm able to see that there's two guys hiding behind the next doorway, right? Now they're so screaming over here that they can't see those next two guys. So by the time we get up to the next doorway, I know that two guys are about to jump out, so they don't scare me, but they scare the pants off of the girls. But while the girls are screaming,
it's escalation. Yeah.
And so again, while the girls are freaking out and adrenalized, they can't see the next level, which I can see because I'm not adrenalized. This is a metaphor for business. The entrepreneur that embraces challenges, the entrepreneur that understands that it is the ability to adapt that will always set them apart. That entrepreneur does not freak out every time something scary happens. That entrepreneur goes, wow, this is a great opportunity to learn and grow as a human being. I wonder what's around the next corner. And so I would say that the advice I'd want to give a young entrepreneur beginning is, hey, stuff's going to happen. And you might think of it as good or bad, but it's all good once you look back upon it. Once you look back on it. So you may as well accept that now. So you know what? There may be a bankruptcy ahead in your future. Who knows? There may be a key employee quitting and you're going to hate it at the time, but in the end, you're going to realize it was one of the greatest gifts you ever had. So I think that's a big one that I would say. And then here's the next one. And it's a little cliched, Andrew, but it's where I would want to wrap everything up for any entrepreneur. It's a two-part thing. If you want to be a good entrepreneur, go read the books. Do the courses at businessfreedom.com, sign up and do the E-Myth courses, learn from Stephen Covey. You can do all that. You'll be a good business owner. If you want to be a great business owner, like a really great business owner, then work on you. Undertake the journeys you need to do to really do self-discovery for yourself. I've climbed Kilimanjaro 7 times. When you push yourself to the very edge of existence, you really learn who you are. When you really decide to commit yourself to a life of meditation, when you decide to work on your own personal development, then you can build a phenomenal business. And right in time with that is this. Too many people think that they're being efficient by eating junk while they're working really hard. They're going, I'm going to grab something quick. I'm going to grab something quick. And they slowly let their health degrade. And what they're one day going to wake up to the reality is that they've worked so hard to build a business so that they can have just enough freedom to get to the hospital and die. And what I want to suggest is that we have the opportunity and the knowledge and the capability today to live incredibly high quality, long lives and enjoy ourselves a great deal. And if you do that, you'll build a better business and you'll enjoy the fruits of your efforts way into the future.
Yeah, because I think the point you can make is that you can work yourself into the ground, and if you don't get the balance right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's some powerful statements to finish our episode tonight. All I can say, Eric, again, is thank you so much for coming on the show. Absolute pleasure to see you. And hopefully at some point in the future, we'll be in the same location so we can enjoy the beach and the sun.
Let's hope it's going to happen. Andrew, thanks so much for having me. Keep up the good work.
If anybody wants to get hold of you, do you want to tell the audience how to get hold of you and how to know more about Eric Edmeades?
Anybody who wants to take a look at changing their relationship with food or transforming their health should go to getwildfit.com. We have a very cool 14-day challenge that people can do there to reset their psychology around food. Anybody interested in becoming a more confident and effective communicator should go to speakernation.com. And of course, wanting to learn about entrepreneurship, marketing, and that sort of stuff, go to businessfreedom.com. And if you just want to chat with me, just come find me on Instagram. I manage my own Instagram account. So if you write to me, you're quite likely to get an actual response from me. And I love to connect with people. So you can always do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eric. Have a wonderful day.
Cheers, you too.